Recent report by Accountancy SA, the current female population in South Africa stands at over 13 million, which is more than half of the population. But only 38% of small and medium-sized enterprises are women-owned and led. The report points out several concerns about this trend and the implications for the women in the greater economy and their ability to compete with their male counterparts. Joining us to share her experiences and the unique challenges that facing women in business is founder of Boz Signage Branding, Fundi Mazibuko. Fundi, good afternoon. Thanks for coming onto the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Well turned out, but obviously it's been a journey. There have been challenges that you've faced as a woman in a business. Talk us through some of those key challenges.
One consistent challenge that as women face is access to funding, access to markets, because naturally people or companies like to use suppliers they've used for years, that they already know, that they already have relationships with, and therefore that access to the market becomes a challenge.
I'm sure there are several other challenges you care to talk about.
Funding is mainly the biggest challenge at Boz Signage. Our biggest cost is buying the resources that we need, the equipment that we need. An example of just one machine that I need to use, it's called a CNC machine, costs just over 500,000. And that becomes a challenge because then you need to go to the bank and the bank asks you for your balance sheet and you don't have a balance sheet. Then you need to start knocking at doors, friends, family, your own investments to fund your business. And that, when we speak to women, remains the biggest challenge.
Something that I've always found intriguing, Fundi, is women supporting women-owned businesses. Is there a lot of that happening? Because I'd like to imagine that that's one way out of some of the challenges that women face, and that if women support other women in business, that it will certainly deal with a huge chunk of those problems.
True that. However, we know that men still remain in power. So a lot of decision makers are still men. I was on the cohort with Property Point, and that allowed us as a group of women to build relationships and network amongst each other. And one of the things, I think, subsequent to that, our cohort in 2020, the Property Point started a cohort of women-owned businesses. And that then allows for collaboration. That allows for networking. Indeed, women still struggle even when other women are in power. However, men still remain in those decision-making positions. So
I didn't quite get your answer. Are women doing enough? Can women do more to support each other in business?
They can, absolutely. There's always an opportunity to improve. Women can only do so much, though, because the gatekeepers are still very much men, are still very much white men. As you know, as women, black women in particular, you're challenging the stereotypes and the bias of being a black person and then a black woman. So women definitely can still do more, and I do think there is a movement of women trying to collaborate, trying to network. I'm also a chairperson of SIBIP, Women's Property Network, where we advocate for women voices. We advocate for women to work together because, once again, if we still hope for a messiah, a savior somewhere, it's going to take us longer than we can. So definitely.
A lot of it really is about taking matters into your own hands where you can to deal with those issues. Now, you talk about property and construction, and I know you do have some involvement in those areas. Are those challenges similar? What are those challenges to where you are in signage, for instance?
Signage, I find it very hard because there is no industry, there is no body, regulating body. Therefore, you almost are on your own and lonely, as opposed to the real estate environment where we have organizations that advocate for women. We have people you can speak to. But I do also think that you need to take matters into your own hands, go out there, knock at doors, network, associate yourself with other industry players so that you remain relevant and you advocate for your business. So Boz Signage really started, if I can just go back, started by accident. Where I used to work, my boss wanted us to look for female-owned suppliers for the entire project. But I was looking...
Was your boss female?
my boss was female and white. However, we had a pressure on our BE scorecard, so we needed to move the needle, shift the needle. And I could not find one black-owned, female-owned in particular, signage company. And I said, I will be that one. So that's the attitude I think more and more as women we need to start adopting. If there are no women, be that woman who's going to be the first one. And then you start slowly giving hope to other women who never even saw that as a space they can play in. Still very male-dominated, white male-dominated, black men still are still trying to build themselves in that space. Very few black players in the signage industry. But I think in a few years to come, we'll see more women.
Now, why do you think that there's still so few black women in particular in this sector? Is it a case of entrepreneurs going into areas that they're familiar with as opposed to where the opportunities lie? So, for instance, the reason, as you said, that you created Boz Signage was because you looked and you couldn't find a single black female-owned business, and that offered an opportunity, and here you are.
Yeah. I do think that exposure is important, especially as black women. You would know that when we were young, our parents only knew that they need to be a teacher, a nurse, a doctor. We didn't know they were pediatricians, for example. We didn't know they were gynecologists. And therefore, I think familiarity is important and exposure is very important. So we always say when one woman speaks, unknowingly you give other women the opportunity and you allow them to see themselves in you. Because if you've never seen a doctor in your family or in your environment, you can't suddenly want to be a doctor. So I think there is the opportunity, there is a lack of opportunity for exposure for women in particular in industry that are very rare. I mean, I know when I started years ago, I started as a property manager. My husband would laugh at me and say, no, but Gatle, you're going to be a caretaker. Because we never saw that as a career, you know. So exposure is very important.
Well, I like the fact that you bring up the issue of exposure, particularly during this month where we acknowledge and recognize women. And I may have to put you on the spot here. What has your role been in exposing other black women, black girls, to the infinite possibility that the world has to offer? I mean, as you rightly said, we only aspire to be what we know. Yes. We can't aspire to be what we don't know. And that stems from the exposure that individuals such as yourself can give to these young women.
So I am proud to say when I joined, I'm currently the Vice President of South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. And when I joined, I started the Women's Forum. I'm the first chairperson. We started this forum 2 years ago. And that's my impact for women. And our goals for this particular forum is to see more women on boards, to see more women occupying spaces that they've never occupied, executive levels, is to see more women get funding, to be investors, to be developers. And I think my role has always been to advocate for women. Prior to being on the Women's Forum, I was a chairperson of Women Property Network, which, once again, it's women in property. And there I was advocating for women to be heard and women to be seen, because I think we are just more than lipstick and high heels, you know.
Yeah, I certainly think so, and I have to agree. Fundi, certainly appreciate your time coming onto the show this afternoon. Wish you a happy Women's Month.
Absolutely, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Fundi Mazibuko, founder of Boz Signage and Branding.